I would like to share with you an experience I had about 10 years ago, give or take. I learned several years after this incident. What happened to me is what doctors call sleep paralysis. I say they're full of shit. It really happened. I do not use drugs outside of caffeine and nicotine. I do not drink alcohol of any sort. So, this was not a hallucination caused by either of the two. Nor do I have any mental issues that I know of. Let's make that clear. Going back about a year before this incident. At that time, I was really into ghost hunting shows. I watched and recorded any and every show I could find that was about a team of ghost hunters investigating haunted places. Some were really good and others just sucked. No disrespect. I remember watching an episode of Wait, in order to post on here, I can't use any real names, places, or addresses. Okay. Let's see if I can do this. I remember watching the show where the lead hunter guy is a muscle-bound jerk, who don't like bullies, but, in turn, is one himself. He orders his crew around like he owns them and they follow him blindly like sleep. I think you know the one. It's a good show, at least it used to be. Anyway, they were investigating ... Oh shit. Here we go again. Clears throat. They were investigating a bar owned by an old country singer, located in one of the southern states, who wrote a semi-popular song about a girl. Everyone in the paranormal community says this place is truly haunted. Okay, now that's over with. Back to the story. They were down in the basement. I think it's been a while since I seen it, and to this day, is the only episode of that show I will never watch again. They were talking with some guy about what goes on there, when up in the left top corner of the screen, there appeared a shadow figure wearing a cowboy hat standing in the doorway. At this time, in the show, they stopped the film and pointed out that when they were actually down there, they didn't see this figure and only discovered it while reviewing the footage. I was naive back then and didn't really know much about the paranormal. I figured, it's a TV show, what harm could it really do? Boy, was I wrong. I now know that ghosts, entities, or whatever you want to call them, can follow you home from places and are made up of energy and can travel through any energy source they want, and one did. Now that I've given you the backstory to this story, let's proceed with the reason I'm actually writing this. Many years before this incident, an old friend of mine, back when I was 11 or 12, who I met through playing baseball in the same team, anyway, he had recently bought a house and was looking for someone to just give his old trailer, mobile home to, which is where this incident happened. We had lost contact over the years, but unbeknown to me, he had kept in contact with my father. My father gave him my number. He called me up and made me an offer I couldn't refuse. A free trailer, just pay lot rent. Oh hell yeah, I'll take it. The trailer was old and needed work, but it was a good deal. I moved in, did some minor repairs, and couple weeks after that, I invited my father and stepmother over for dinner. My stepmother is what she calls an old soul. She can sense when things are not right with the universe. She took one look at the place and said, "There's bad juju here, I don't like it." Every time she came to visit, she was nervous. She wouldn't sit still, always looking down the hallway. She eventually stopped coming. She said it was too thick for her. Whatever that meant. I just thought she was nuts. I now know she's not. I lived there for many years, had some strange things happen. Seeing apparitions out of the corner of my eye, voices, cold breezes, etc. I just chalked it up to bad lighting, outside noises, insulation issues. Some rational explanation, until that night. The night that changed my whole belief systems forever. The night I will never forget. I was laying in bed, asleep on my back, like I always do, when I woke up and noticed a black figure standing in the doorway of my bedroom. The hallway light was on. I always leave it on, in case I need to make a bathroom run late at night. The light from behind the figure showed it had a head, 2 arms and 2 legs, but no eyes. It was just standing there. I blinked a couple times to make sure I was seeing what I was seeing, and sure enough I was. Only this time, when I looked at it, it was wearing a cowboy hat. The moment I realized that, I physically saw it jump from the standing position in the doorway over top of the bed and land on top of me. My body became stiff, unable to move. Out of my peripheral vision, I could see my wife lying next to me. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. I saw the figure sitting on top of me. It reached its hands down into my chest, and started squeezing my lungs. I couldn't breathe. It was squeezing the life right out of me. There I was, gasping for air, paralyzed, and unable to make a sound. Just when I thought I was about to die, a series of intensely bright white lights started flashing all around the room, like a strobe light on steroids. I closed my eyes to shield them from the lights. It was that bright. All of a sudden, my body jerked a couple times like a convulsion and then stopped. I opened my eyes and it was gone. I was able to breathe again. I lied there, heavy breathing for a good 20 minutes, too scared to move. When I finally got the nerve to try, I slowly moved my right hand over to my nightstand. Still shaking from fear, I grabbed my phone to check the time. Like I always do when I wake up in the middle of the night. The time was 3:48 a.m., the witching hour. Needless to say, I did not go back to sleep that night. I cautiously got out of bed, so not to wake up my wife, and turned on every light in the house. Every single one, including all the bedroom lights. How my wife stayed sleeping, I don't know, but thankfully she did. I made a pot of coffee, grabbed my Bible and sat at the dining room table, drinking coffee, Bible in hand until the morning came. I must have smoked at least a pack and a half of cigarettes in that 3-hour span of time. I'm good with that. I'm still alive. I asked my wife if she had seen or heard anything strange the night before. She said no, and I left it at that. I didn't tell her what had happened, and I still haven't. She probably wouldn't believe me anyway. My wife and I stayed at the trailer for about 2 months after that. When we got the opportunity to rent an actual house, we took it. We packed all our things and moved out. On the last day we were ever at that trailer, my wife had left the vacuum in the back bedroom, where this experience happened. She asked if I would go get said vacuum and I agreed. Upon entering the room, a weird sense of dread fell over me and something inside of me told me I needed to get out of there quick. I grabbed the vacuum, ran down the hallway and out the front door as fast as I could, slamming the door behind me. I then turned around and yelled, "You want this place, you can have it. I'm gone." My wife looked at me like I lost my mind. My father and stepmother helped us move, along with some friends. My stepmother insisted that we drive all the vehicles that contained our belongings over bodies of water to block any of the bad juju from coming with us to the new house. We didn't have had no bad experiences in our new house. Aside from a few really bad dreams I had the first couple nights we were there, about the trailer, but that was it. Well, that's my story. I don't really care if you believe me or not. I know for a fact, it really happened.
I love my wife above all else. I have loved her since the moment I first laid eyes on her. I would do anything for her, and that has never changed after all these years. We first met in college. We were both theatre majors and it was day 1 of acting 1 class that our eyes met for the first time. She had chocolate brown eyes that were complemented by her dark brown curls. We stared at each other constantly that first day, and when we were partnered together, we knew that it was fate. "My name is Margaret," she said to as soon as I walked up to her after class. I took her by an hand and kissed it. "Henry," I responded. She then took one of my long dreadlocks and wrapped it around her finger, staring me in the eyes and biting her lip. It was an amazing meeting with an even better ending later that night. The following night, we went on our first date, a theatre production of Suano. We held each other's hand through the entire performance, and afterward, I walked her to her dormitory. Every day after that was like a love story. We went through good times and bad times. We broke up and got back together. Through it all, one thing never changed for me: I loved her and would do anything for her. We got married after graduation and went on to become very successful in the stage acting scene. We were considered a power couple and were always cast in romantic roles opposite each other. It was easy to bring the true deep love that we felt for each other to the stage, and it was nice to make money from it. One day, our lives took a turn. We had just finished a successful performance of the stage play The Clean House when we were approached by a member of the audience. "That was an amazing performance," he said, a creepy English accent behind his words. "Why, thank you, you're sweet," said Margaret, gripping my hand. I could tell this guy had creeped her out, but being a talented actress, she was able to put on a nice front. "I've been watching you two for a very long time," he continued, his pale blue eyes staring into Margaret. "I am very much a fan of your work. Every performance is riveting, and I can tell that you put true passion into your exchanges. You two must truly love each other." "We do," I said, stepping slightly in front of Margaret. "We love each other very much. I would do anything for her." I looked at her, and she gave me that beautiful smile of hers. "That warms my heart to hear," he said as he put his arms behind his back, and looking up into the night sky. "True love is a valuable gift that is often taken for granted. If you're not careful, you can easily lose it forever, and it can never be replaced, no matter how hard you try." He then looked at me, and I could see just how disturbing his pale blue eyes were. "Hold on to that gift. Cherish it forever." He began to walk away before I asked the question that had been bothering me since we met. "Who are you?" I yelled. He stopped and turned his head. "Your biggest fan," he answered. He then walked away. Margaret and I looked at each other, baffled at what had just taken place. Later that night, we were sitting on our couch watching a movie when suddenly there was a knock at the door. "Wonder who that could be," said Margaret as she got up to see who it was. She looked at the peephole and froze in place before taking a single step back and opening the door. Standing just outside the door was the same man we had talked to earlier that night. He stood there with his arms behind him, his pale blue eyes shining like the moon. "Honey," I said, standing up from the couch to join Margaret at the door. "Please come in," Margaret said to the man, to my shock. "What are you doing?" I yelled, running to get to the door. The man stepped inside before I got there, and began to stroke her face. When I finally got to them, I threw my fist and connected with his face, knocking him back outside. I quickly slammed the door and locked it. I turned to Margaret, who was in some sort of a trance. I tried to snap her out of it. "Margaret!" I yelled, shaking her. "Margaret! Wake up!" There was nothing I could do to get her to respond. I shook her, slapped her, even splashed water in her face. Nothing. Nothing would work. Suddenly, the lights in the house went out. I looked around until I saw the silhouette of a man standing outside our living room window. I blinked and it was gone. I began to panic and ran to the gun safe in our bedroom. Despite being theater nerds, we were very well trained in self-defense and firearms. We could each hold our own if our lives were in danger, and if there was ever a time to put that training to use, it was now. When I got back to the living room, I immediately raised my weapon. There stood the strange man, holding Margaret by the face. "Let go of her, motherfucker," I yelled, aiming for his head. He looked at me, and the only thing I could see in the darkness was glowing red eyes. He then turned his head to Margaret and I fired, hitting him directly in the head. He fell to the floor hard and I ran over. Margaret fell over too, but I caught her before she hit the ground. She still would not respond, her eyes wide open in a trance. I looked over to the man, but he was gone. I gently laid her on the floor and stood up quickly, readying my weapon once again. Suddenly, I felt a strong, tight grip on the back on my neck and I was then thrown across the room, hitting the wall. I groaned in pain as I grabbed my gun and slowly stood to my feet, shaking as I raised my weapon again. Again, he had a hold of Margaret, but this time he pulled her head close to his. I felt my heart race and my blood boil as he put her lips to his glowing red eyes staring right at me. "No!" I screamed as I ran towards them. He then pushed her to the side and opened his arms to me, as if inviting me to fire on him again. I obliged and fired 5 rounds into him, but all he did was allow them to connect as he laughed. I ran up to him, but he grabbed me by the throat before I could do anything. He pulled me close to his face and I could see every horrifying feature. Not only did he have demon-like eyes, but his face was covered in disgusting, pulsating veins. In his mouth were 2 sharp fangs and a long slimy tongue, which rubbed against my face, as if tasting me before taking his first bite. I lifted my gun to the arm that had a hold of me and fired twice. He growled in pain as he released me and I connected the butt of my gun to his face, repeatedly. He fell to the floor and I mounted him, smashing his face more and more, harder and faster. I could feel the blood gush and spray all over as the bones in his skull crack and collapse. By the time I was done, there was nothing but smashed bone, brains, and blood. I panted as I stood back up and limped over to Margaret, who was now fully unconscious. I shook her and she finally opened her eyes, looking into mine with fear and confusion. "Margaret," I said, feeling relieved that she was all right. I held her close and we laid there until I looked over to where the body of the stranger should have been. He was gone and panic arose once again and we both stood up quickly. I turned to face Margaret and screamed when I saw him standing behind her, still in the process of regenerating his face. Before I had a chance to react, he sunk his fangs deep into Margaret's neck. She screamed in pain as I screamed in rage, hitting the monster in the skull once again with my gun. I felt bone crack again as he released her. Again, I mounted him and went to work, growing exhausted the longer it went. I knew this wouldn't last, as he would surely regenerate again. It soon became obvious what exactly I was dealing with. He had put Margaret into a trance, merely by looking at her, even looking through a peephole. It wasn't until he invited him inside that he actually got in. He had glowing red eyes and fangs, and he bit Margaret in the neck. He's a goddamn vampire, I thought to myself. While he was down, I ran to the kitchen and grabbed an old wooden brook. I broke it in half and ran back to the body, where I rammed it as hard as I could directly into his heart. The body began to convulse and flail its arms and legs all over. Suddenly, it stopped and went completely limp, before melting away into deep red blood and other disgusting fluids. After catching my breath, I slowly turned my attention to Margaret. She sat there in the darkness, legs folded and upper torso full erect. "Honey?" I said, nervously approaching her. In the darkness, I could only see her silhouette, until her eyes began to slowly glow red. There was only one thing I could think of to do. I love my wife. I would do anything for her. Even if that meant chaining her up in the basement, feeding her a pint of my own blood every day while I figure out what to do about her. When the hunger would hit her, she became like a wild animal that cannot be communicated with. So, I fed her my blood and she became herself again. She understood the situation and never held it against me. It wasn't easy, but it was all we could do. Unfortunately, a pint only went so far, until soon it wasn't enough. So I gave more and more until the point that I was endangering myself with so much blood loss. It was then that I decided to feed her full meals. It started with small animals at first, and then cats and dogs. Soon I made the hard decision to invite homeless people into our home, knock them out, and give them to her. This went on for far too long before it really started to affect us. She felt like a monster and I did as well. I love my wife and I would do anything for her, which brings me to now. I'm sitting here, writing this, shaking. There is literal blood on my hands as I try to compose myself. She asked me to do one last thing for her. I refused at first, because I loved her too much. "If you love me," she began, looking me deep in my eyes, her now pale blues not blinking, "you will do this." Tears fell from both of our eyes as I pulled her in close. "I love you, Margaret," I whispered. "I love you, Henry," she responded. I could hear the squish as I drove the wooden stake in her heart. I trembled as I listened to her whimpers, gasps, and eventual silence. I broke down as her body melted away into liquid. I laid there in her remains, sobbing. I sit here now, with nothing left but the warning about the creatures of fiction that are very much a reality. I write my confession of the crimes I have committed out of love. I say goodbye to any friends or loved ones that may be reading this. I loved her, and I did everything for her.